We have 19 members of the public registered to speak today. The first 30 minutes of public comment will be delivered at the board meeting, and the remainder will be posted online for the public and board members. I'd like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware that there will be a warning beep to remind you that you have 30 seconds to conclude your remarks. Thank you for your patience and understanding throughout the virtual public comment session. The next speaker is Senator Diane Savino.
Board members, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. Our city and state have been through extraordinarily difficult times since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has affected all of us personally, and we now face dire economic difficulties in so many areas, including how we get around. Frankly, we need help. Help from our federal government that we already contribute so much to through our taxes. It is time for them to step up and ensure that they pass legislation that includes $12 billion in direct aid to the MTA. The consequences of not receiving additional funding mean extending hardship for years to come in our city. We cannot afford to lay off workers, we cannot afford to decrease services or institute fare and toll hikes. MTA workers have been on the front lines of this pandemic since it first began, putting themselves at risk to ensure that other workers like our nurses, doctors, EMTs, and paramedics have been able to get to work and to take care of their patients. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to make it through this. We cannot leave them out to dry now. Our residents depend on the MTA to get to and from work, and they're already struggling to keep their jobs through this pandemic. Decreases in services will make it more difficult for them to get around, and increased fares will make it harder to pay for other necessities like food and rent. We as legislators understand that there are going to be difficult financial times for years to come because of what we're going through right now. But that does not mean that we should wait to take action. We must be proactive and work with the federal government to ensure that essential services are able to continue functioning. The MTA is one of those essential services. Again, I thank you for your time, and I'm hopeful that we will find a solution to these financial struggles.
The next speaker is Senator Andrew Gennardis.
Hi, good afternoon. This is State Senator Andrew Gennardis. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak at the board meeting today. I want to start off my comments by thanking the tens of thousands of men and women who make up the MTA's workforce, who have done just an incredible job in keeping New York City moving forward and our region moving forward during the depths of the crisis, and who have not shied away for a second in doing whatever it takes to keep our system safe, secure, reliable for all. And I want you all to know that your service and your work is deeply appreciated by many in this city and in this state. I want to talk briefly about an issue that I think has a big impact on the future of that workforce, and that is the MTA's budget outlook and our fiscal crisis that we are facing. We all read the papers. We all know the MTA is facing dire financial circumstances through no fault of their own. The CARES Act funding has been expired. We urgently need federal assistance to the tune of at least $10 billion to help secure and stabilize the system and make sure that we do not have to lay off any of our employees or have to cut service to any part of our system. Laying off employees in this moment would be absolutely devastating, especially it would be adding insult to injury to those employees who did not have the luxury of Zooming their way through their workday and had to come to work every single day and be on the front lines. And if we don't get federal assistance, we will have to face debilitating service cuts to our system at a time when our city and our region simply cannot afford to stop moving forward. So please know that I am adding my voice to those who are calling on the federal government for immediate assistance. And my commitment to this board and to the riding public is to do everything in my power and use every tool at my disposal to keep pushing, arguing, pleading, begging for the federal aid that we so desperately need. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Senator Brad Hoyleman.
Hello, I'm State Senator Brad Hoyleman, representing the 27th Senate District. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comment during this difficult time. I know the MTA faces an extraordinary fiscal crisis, and I truly appreciate the MTA's staff and board's continued dedication to keeping New Yorkers connected and safe. The federal government's failure thus far to provide appropriate financial relief to address the effects of the massive drop in ridership caused by the pandemic is unconscionable and risks compromising our entire regional economy. However, while that failure has caused hardship and difficult choices, those burdens are shared by the MTA's small commercial tenants as well. Many retail businesses and restaurants in Grand Central Terminal are facing existential threats to their survival, and some have already closed for good. I know that the MTA has worked with those tenants in the past to waive certain penalties and defer rent payments from April to July, but they desperately need a long-term solution that addresses the struggles they face through no fault of their own due to state restrictions and loss of customers. Thus far, to my understanding, the MTA has not offered these tenants rent abatement or even had substantive discussions with some of them on this issue. And tenants recently received notices that not only will deferments and concessions end, but past due rent balances will now be subject to late fees and penalties. I urge the MTA to negotiate with its tenants in good faith and explore solutions that would recognize their drastically reduced revenue, including rent abatements. The deep structural financial problems caused by the pandemic will only be solved by a comprehensive federal response. Forcing these tenants, many of whom have been in business for a decade or more, to either pay their rent in full or close up shop will only cause deeper, more lasting damage to the economy and to our local communities without meaningfully addressing the MTA's financial issues. I hope the MTA will set an example for other agencies and the private sector by acknowledging their plight and working collaboratively with them in this time of deep uncertainty, and then building in corresponding requests for assistance from the federal government to address the costs borne by the authority to assist its tenants. If we can't do this as government, how can we in good faith be asking landlords across the city to do it? The answer isn't to not extend relief, it's to lead by example. The moment we're faced with leaves us with few good options, but it remains critical for us all to pull together as New Yorkers to do our best for riders, small businesses, and our transit system and recognize that our struggles are shared. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide comment.
The next speaker is Alida Dupree.
Good morning, Chair Pat Foy and members. Alida Dupree for the record. My pronouns are she and her. It's good to be back with you. First of all, I am pleased with the progress we're making with Omni fare payment. 2/3 of the station's done and Manhattan Buses as well. So let's keep this work going and get reduced fare passes into that protocol. It's going to help me and a lot of people. Accessibility is very important. You know, I go out for my walks and sometimes my feet get blistered. So I'm cognizant of walking. I'd like to see some kind of schematics with each of these stations in our system so we know where the various ramps and elevators are to navigate. Of course, Grand Central is a very big part of that. Continuing to keep that station maintained and clean, continue the work with East Side Access. I'm looking forward to seeing that open up and have the opportunity to take the Long Island Railroad to the east side. Sustainability. I want to see a wind and solar powered subway. Emissions is a very critical issue, and it's going to take time. But I think that we can make the progress to reduce our carbon emissions. So again, I think about that MTA is legendary. I listened to another George Harrison song called Love Comes to Everyone. And it reminds me of Grand Central Terminal again. And I think the acoustics of Grand Central Terminal are great for music. So Grand Central is about the people. And it's a place near and dear to me. Discovered things bigger than myself. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rachel Foss.
Good morning. I am Rachel Foss, Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for authorities like the MTA. We are here to amplify what Chair Foy and others have been saying for months. The MTA faces financial destruction without a huge influx of federal emergency aid. There is no plan B that results in an economically and socially viable New York City. The U.S. Congress must deliver a huge emergency aid package with the more than $10 billion the MTA needs through 2021. Given your roles as members of the MTA board, we ask that you be prepared to address the possible scenarios for the future well ahead of the release of the November financial plan and the anticipated adoption of the 2021 budget in December. These times are unprecedented, and the earlier a public dialogue is created about the possible scenarios, the better all stakeholders can weigh in about what options will be the least harmful, both in the short and long term. Further, the consequences of congressional inaction will be made more stark. While we are encouraged to hear Chairman Foy say that deficit borrowing would be like going to the top of 2 Broadway and lighting million-dollar bills and throwing them into Broadway, a true red line must be drawn on how much debt is too much for the MTA. With COVID ravaging the MTA's finances, debt payments will reach nearly 26% of operating revenues in 2021. This is up from 11% in 2004. The MTA must learn from the past and ensure that riders in future years aren't suffering under a transit system so saddled with debt it can't maintain service levels or a state of good repair. There should be an independent assessment of MTA debt conducted by the state comptroller and robust discussions by the board about how to mitigate debt payments. While it's a positive development, the MTA was able to borrow $450 million from the Federal Reserve Municipal Liquidity Program, and this borrowing still comes at a cost of 1.92% interest, must be paid back in 3 years, and only provides a nickel on the dollar of what the MTA needs to bridge the $10 billion gap. The Fed should significantly improve the program to include 0 or much lower interest rates over a longer period of time. Only they have the power to make a limited level of borrowing or debt refinancing a potentially viable option for the MTA. Similarly, Congress must deliver the $10 billion in emergency aid to the MTA, as the MTA cannot cut or borrow its way out of this deficit without devastating consequences for riders. Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Jason Rabinowitz.
Thank you, members of the MTA board, for giving me an opportunity to speak today. I've watched many of these board meetings throughout the years, but I never quite felt the need to participate in the public comment process until right now. Public transportation is the heart and soul of New York City and the greater tri-state region as a whole. We all know that. I don't have to explain that. I'm here today to urge our elected leaders and every riding passenger to advocate for the critical federal funding needed to help MTA through this unprecedented financial crisis. Ridership is low right now, but we must ensure that there's still a functional transit system ready for an eventual return to normal life, and this can only happen with emergency federal funding. In recent years, the MTA has made really great strides in improving service, like speeding up slow-moving R trains to providing a real-time data and information that just a few years ago that was unthinkable, like real-time arrival information for trains and service change notices on new screens throughout the system. Many stations have had elevators installed after a century of denying riders with disabilities, and ancient signals are finally being replaced. We've come too far in recent years to throw all this progress away and let our public transportation system stagnate and, God forbid, deteriorate, undoing years of great progress. The city and region needs public transportation. There's no alternative to that. I again urge our leaders in Washington provide the emergency funding the MTA so desperately needs to keep New York moving. We can't live in this city without adequate public transportation. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I hope our message is heard in Washington and we get the funding we need. Thank you.
The next speaker is Chris Gray.
Good afternoon, everyone, or I should say good morning. I'm Christopher D. Gray, member of the New York City Transit Riders Council and accessibility to the subways and buses and Long Island Railroad ADA Task Force. My concern is that we do not want to see cuts at all for any MTA bus, subway, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, including accessibility. As the capital is coming, is the capital money we definitely need it for accessibility elevators. We definitely need for the ramps, update our technology for making sure people with disabilities or seniors are getting the necessary help to get on buses, subways, including accessorized. So all I'm asking is from the MTA is we have to keep advocating, but I'm also encouraging Washington to please get yourself together and stop fighting each other, and let's work together and let's get the funding in. As a lot of us say, this has nothing to do with politics time. This has to do with safety, health, safety, and everything else together. So I hope that MTA, as they're doing their best, but I hope our elected officials can hear this clearly. Stop the fighting, stop being disrespectful, and let's work together and get the funding in. Doesn't matter which party you're in, let's get it done now. Thank you.
The next speaker is Lisa Daglian.
Greetings. I'm Lisa Daglian, Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, PCAC. This board meeting is being convened to discuss the MTA's finances in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know the news is bad and will only get worse if desperately needed federal funds don't come through. Without the billions of dollars needed through the end of 2021, you will be forced to take difficult actions, including deep service cuts, reduced cleaning, substantial fare increases, harmful layoffs, and a significant reduction in the capital program. We're all in this fight together. Millions of New Yorkers rely on the city's subways and buses and the Long Island Railroad and Metro North to get to work, jobs that support our region's recovery and are helping rebuild our economy. As we move into our next normal, it is critical that safe and sufficient services is available to anyone who needs it. To us, that includes a plan to return to 24/7 subway service. The overnight closures to remove homeless and thoroughly clean cars and stations have been in place since May. With milestones and metrics rightly being the cornerstone of the state's reopening, we urge similar publicly discussed metrics for restoration of overnight service. If there's a plan for reopening gyms, there should be one for reopening the subway. And since the majority of overnight use has historically been between 4 and 5 a.m., we'd like to see a more immediate option for rolling back closures to restart service at 4. Riders must feel and be safe whenever they travel. Even with lower ridership, we're alarmed by attacks on workers and apparent upticks in subway crime and vandalism. The former coming as brazen assaults, and the latter resulting in train cars being taken out of service when that can least be afforded. While many cautions have been taken to address COVID, we'd like to know what plans are being developed to address these important safety concerns. We know that your efforts in these and other areas depend heavily on funding. We're committed to fighting this critical fight with you. Thank you.
The next speaker is Deborah Greif.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deborah Greif. I'm the chairperson of the Brooklyn Family Support Service Advisory Council. I'm extremely concerned because many times when cuts are done to the MTA, it does affect people with disabilities. And disabilities does not discriminate. It affects everyone from babies to seniors. I'm concerned because we have been going more forward with building more elevators, some ramps, we need more ramps. But I'm concerned because when the last cuts you had, it affected the disability community so badly, especially with the bus service. I actually will say I'm kind of glad that we will be starting to collect the fares by the end of August. And I say this because I'm tired of being harassed by certain bus drivers who do not understand that what a disability means. You don't have to show your disability. In fact, you don't even have to look like a senior. You just have to have, if you have proof, that's it. And the route they need to, I would like to see, besides the cuts, I would like to see the drivers and many of the staff who work in the train stations are given updated disability etiquette training. As I'm tired of myself and other fellow advocates being insulted and told we have to go to the back of the bus when some of us are under 5 feet tall, and there are times the parent is so disabled they cannot lift the child. This disability community will be advocating to make sure funding is kept and restored for the full MTA, and also to make sure that all new improvements for accessibilities are kept. Thank you.
The next speaker is Felicia Park Rogers.
Good day. My name is Felicia Park Rogers. I am the Director of Regional Infrastructure Projects for Tri-State Transportation Campaign, one of our region's most longstanding transportation policy and advocacy organizations. First, I would like to thank the MTA board and staff for their tremendous dedication to our region's transit systems during these truly unprecedented times. New York City's economy, the region's economy, and indeed our nation's economy all rely on the maintenance of a fully functioning MTA. We need it now to transport workers with no other means of transportation, and we will need it in the future if we are to have any hopes of a full and meaningful economic recovery. Along those lines, at Tri-State, we will continue to advocate to the full extent of our abilities for the MTA to receive more than $10 billion in emergency relief aid from the federal government. We realize the MTA's current budget crisis is through no fault of its own and is on a scale too massive to be solved with budget cuts. Just as the federal government would be tasked with helping a region recover from a natural disaster, such as a hurricane or earthquake, so too is federal assistance required to recover from this public health disaster. And we will continue to push for that even as the talks in Congress have stalled. Meanwhile, even as we are all well aware of the overwhelming financial difficulties being faced by the MTA, we call on you to only cut service as a last resort. Even at a vastly reduced ridership, the MTA provides more than 2 million rides a day. These are frontline essential workers who need to get to work to feed their families. These are grandmothers traveling to their doctor's appointments. These are parents taking their children to daycare. These are our city's most stalwart and vulnerable residents whose economic and practical lives cannot function without a fully functioning MTA. Our research at Tri-State has shown that one of the most important ways to keep transit from being a vector of the novel coronavirus, in addition, of course, to mask wearing and air ventilation, is to keep crowding down. If service is reduced, buses and trains will become crowded and there will be increased risks of spread. The region's health and economy depend on maintaining frequent service for our buses and trains. Additionally, the long-term
Please conclude your remarks.
Please include public input as you face service changes and cutbacks. It will be critical to maintaining the priorities and responsiveness that our region deserves. Thank you again.
The next speaker is Skylar Bissam-Rapp.
Hi, my name is Skylar Bissam-Rapp. I'm a senior associate at the Practice for Architecture and Urbanism. We're a planning and architecture firm in New York. We second everything that the other speakers have said. We're proponents of transit for its own sake, especially at this time with increased needs for health and safety. But furthermore, we want to call attention to the need for transit as a holistic part of city planning in general. This work is exemplified by the project that we undertook with Farhad Manju of the New York Times for his recent editorial, I've Seen a Future Without Cars. And what that project highlights is the relationship between transit and density in order to create livable and sustainable cities. This is more than just a superficial issue. This is also an equity issue, as historically marginalized and vulnerable communities are those most affected by increased fare costs and decreased service. As the rising cost of housing makes people look further afield for affordable places to live, ensuring that transit options connect people regionally is critical, not just that service levels are maintained, but that they're expanded in order to meet the increasing needs for transit in a larger interconnected region. In light of this, federal funding for the MTA is indispensable to the future of the New York City region, and federal funding for transit more broadly is critical to the future of American cities. Thank you.
The next speaker is Matt Camper.
Good morning, MTA board. My name is Matt Camper. I'm the regional director for the Long Island Railroad with Passengers United. So the MTA, I understand, is going through a horrible time, a financial crisis that we've never seen in our lifetimes. And I completely understand, what's going on with that and everything. But, the feds, including Mitch McConnell, President Donald Trump in Washington, will not help us out, will not make sure that we get the money that we need to stay afloat as an organization, and make sure that, most importantly, that riders get around where they need to go when they need to. And I think, and along with my colleagues from Passengers United, also think at the same time that it is time that we need to start looking out for ourselves and looking out for, what's best for us. And that is why today I am calling on the state legislature up in Albany, the state Senate, the state assembly, and the governor to come up with some kind of bill, because at the same time, New Jersey has a gas tax in place, and I think it's like 41 cents of it goes towards, different transportation projects in New Jersey, including New Jersey Transit. And I think it is something that will absolutely help us here in New York if we have a gas tax that is in place. So that way, let's say even that 41 cents, maybe 25 cents of it of each gas time somebody pays for gas will go towards the MTA, and that will be a solution that I think will be absolutely, without a doubt, something that can help the MTA with its financial situation. So I really hope the MTA can work with the state legislature to come up with this and come up with a bill that will benefit us riders. So that's it. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Jason Anthony.
Good morning, MTA board. I'm Jason Anthony, the Executive Vice President of Passengers United. We are aware that the MTA is in a financial crisis. We all have been experiencing it throughout the past few months. But it is time that the MTA thinks outside the box. Something like considering a gas tax, just like New Jersey, or like other jurisdictions use 1 penny, or in other words, 1 cent of their sales tax to cover transportation. It is time that Pat Foy and the other board members send a clear message to the state assembly and the state senate and to the governor that we cannot be dependent of the federal government. The federal government is not going to help us, to be honest. They won't, because they only think about themselves. So my recommendation is look for help and look for it from the state. And another thing, I think that we should keep the buses free for now, because I think it's premature to charging fares, despite that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. What if it gets worse and people will have to take 3 buses and pay $5.50 to get from one place to another? So let's do what we have to do, but let's do it wisely. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
The next speaker is Charlton De Souza.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Charlton De Souza. I'm the president of Passengers United. And I have to say, first and foremost, that I agree with the gas tax that's being proposed by some of our members, Matt Camper. And I also feel that we should have advertising in the subways, on subway seats, subway buses, and that'll generate more money, and also sponsorship of subway stations by companies that will help generate more revenue. Now, let's go on to the overnight service changes. I'm very, very upset that the cabs are being canceled overnight. But first and foremost, I feel that why is it overnight that people have to pay a bus fare when the subways are closed? And what I don't understand is people now who have to take 3 buses coming from Lower Manhattan are going to have to pay 3 fares if they live in Southeast Queens, or 4 fares. You guys need to rethink that. And I think the buses overnight should be free. Also, the Long Island Railroad should be free, because essential workers have been through enough. They weathered the storm. They protected our city. They should not have to be charged overnight. And that's my opinion. Also, with the crime that's been going on in the subways and the breaking of windows on the 7 train, I think it's a disgrace whoever's doing this. And I think that the police need to be out in full force at every station. And also with the homeless, even though the subways are closed between 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., we don't see the homeless being taken out of the subways. You know, the cops are coming downstairs, they see the homeless, and they're letting them stay there overnight, and then they disappear, the police. So what's the purpose of keeping the subways closed then from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m.? So we really need to rethink how we're doing this cleaning thing and whether it's the best for the city. But I feel that we can still clean the subways and keep the, keep everything open, but we just need to have police on the trains, or just run shorter train cars overnight, so that the homeless can take over the trains. And I'm sorry, I understand that people are, in need, and there's a lot of people right now who are homeless. We get that, but the MT has an $8 million contract with the Bowery Residents Committee. So we need to find out what is happening with this contract. We need to even find out if the state and the city's social systems are working. We need to understand this. But in terms of your MTA employees, there's going to be a candlelight ceremony on Wednesday, and we support all of them, including the ones who passed away. Our condolences go to all of them. Thank you.
The next speaker is Murray Bowden.
Good morning. My name is Murray Bowden. The steps taken by New York City Transit to make sure the trains and buses are safe to ride with the virus still around are excellent. They are developing techniques that others are now using. The positive actions taken by transit needs to be recognized by more people. Accessibility to transit stations is being installed at an unprecedented rate. Thank you, Alex. Long Island Railroad builds bridges on the ground, then uses cranes to install the bridges on pre-built foundations. How can that new bridge construction technique be transmitted to New York State for bridge replacement? The Canarsie Tunnel replacement was a new and fast method for dealing with infrastructure. Can New York State and the Thruway somehow use similar techniques? Bridge and Tunnel has made some safety changes I suggested. Excellent. Thank you. We all thank you. Mta Buses is revising bus routes. Westchester would like to have the traffic lights on the Central Avenue route coordinated with traffic going to and from the railroad stations. Real important to us people up here in Westchester. Saturday, we spent an hour with 2 grandchildren who were going off to college. One left for college yesterday, Sunday, and arrived at Colby campus this morning at 8 a.m. The other goes to freshman orientation sometime next week. Both will attend classes on campus and in person. Thank you all to all of the people at the MTA who have provided me with good information in the years. And some, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I hope I can do it again. Bye.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ellen Shannon.
Ellen Shannon, Associate Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. I haven't seen you all for some time, and I'd like to thank every single employee and board member for the hard work that you've done and continue to do in the face of COVID. I'm so very sorry for all you have lost and all of you who are still suffering illnesses from COVID-19. Chairman Foy, I'm here on behalf of the PCAC and its councils, asking you to please bring back the committee meetings. Now more than ever, people are beginning to return to the city. Rebuilding trust through transparency has never been more important. We need to hear more from the agency staff on the many ongoing efforts happening on behalf of riders. We need to hear more about the ridership and performance data. And we need to hear your MTA board members raising the important issues they do in discussion on behalf of the riders and labor. The meetings act as an educational institution of the MTA system. They're essentially MTA University. Committee meetings are important teaching tools, not just for regional stakeholders, but also for MTA employees. They provide a wealth of information that we just cannot lose. At PCAC, we've always given the MTA board kudos for having more public discussion than any other transit agency. September is the right time to go back to full committee meetings. Schools are starting back next month and folks are returning to work from the summer. Our hope is that today you will announce that the MTA committee meetings will resume in September via Zoom. Hope that wish comes true. Thank you.
The next speaker is Andy Pollack.
Good morning, Chairman Foy, members of the board. I'm Andy Pollack. I'm the Public Advisor to Passengers United. So a couple things. Number one, this is the second straight August where we've had no recess. Last year, it was to address overtime at the Long Island Railroad. And this year, it is to address the COVID financial disaster thanks to the pandemic. I'll get to that later on. Quickly regarding Omni, I'm very pleased to hear the good news that Omni is going to be functioning at Flushing Main Street on the 7. and Kew Gardens Union Turnpike along the E and the F line, as I do expect to return back to the subway system sometime in 2021. Third thing I want to bring up, the Q46 overnight schedule is a complete mess. I'm a volunteer actually at Long Island Jewish, and I haven't volunteered since March 9th. And every day I have kept the essential employees in my thoughts and prayers, of course. And right now I feel that the service on the overnight schedule is inappropriate. I can't understand why there isn't half-hourly service on the Q46 east and westbound overnight to support our essential workers at the hospital. So I'm hoping in the fall, maybe Craig Serpiano can reevaluate it and look into having half-hourly service on the Q46, hopefully starting sometime in September or October. And the last point regarding the economic mess, I'm very disappointed in the feds right now. If the MTA can organize a special board meeting for August, why can't the U.S. House and U.S. Senate realize that it's inappropriate to take a recess right now, not come back until after Labor Day and get a deal done? I cannot completely understand that. I have reached out to numerous federal officials and they are not even budging. So my last point is any service cuts that are being proposed need to be unveiled to the public via PDF or whenever Pat Foy feels it is appropriate that he can personally announce that. So there should be public input on that. One speaker did mention that. I completely agree. So this is going to be a very long process, and our organization will be vocal about any service cuts that are planned either this year or in 2021. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all in September.
The next speaker is Theo Allen.
So I want to speak about the MTA's focus on the overnight closures and the constant cleaning. Based on evidence, I advocated in March and April to shut down the subways because I saw all this spread coming from things like touching surfaces. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case based on aerosol evidence, but we still have 80% when I took the MTA of people wearing masks, covering their nose and mouth properly. If we are going to get back to a place where we can have full service, not have all this reduced capacity, we need people to wear masks and wear them properly. And the MTA needs to do a better job at enforcing this. Because if people wear masks, as we see in places like Japan, you're not going to get the same level of spread that you have in an indoor environment like the MTA, where people are unmasked. You actually have a higher rate of infection. In addition, the MTA needs to focus on ventilation in the subway stations and on buses, even opening the windows, because while 18 air changes an hour on the subways is a really good way to slow the spread, we need that on every mode for the MTA and all transit agencies in New York. I want to thank the MTA for having this August board meeting, and I would also like to say that there's going to be tough cuts, but you don't need to keep the subway closed 24/7. You do need to make sure everyone's wearing a mask properly on MTA property, though.
The next speaker is Steve Lawton.
Hi, my name is Stephen Lawton, and I'm president of CWA Local 1102. Our local represents approximately 300 workers who perform customer service at the Staten Island Easy Pass Center, currently for an MTA contractor named Conduit. Throughout COVID-19, these have been very essential workers who help to keep our state moving. The vast majority of the workers live on the island and are people of color. These are good jobs that provide enormous benefits to the local community and an enormous service to the state as a whole. CWA Local 1102 has negotiated improved pay and benefits, as well as a measure of job security and a grievance procedure that ensures fair treatment. When its call center contracts are rebid, the MTA must take care to protect its contracted workforce from both mass firings and from losing the hard-won job standards. Without strong policies from the MTA to protect them, our 300 members in Staten Island, another 400 plus non-represented workers in Staten Island, Endicott, New York, Queens, and Yonkers are all facing the threat of unemployment during both a public health crisis and a devastating economic crisis. This is unacceptable, especially since the evidence shows that the current contractor, Conduent, and its employees are performing well. No operational need to change contractors has been shown. It will appear that the only real purpose for changing contractors is to drive down wages. The MTA should prevent a mass layoff of these Easy Pass workers by requiring that its call center contractors retain the pre-existing workforce and stay in the same area as the current operation so that people can actually get to their jobs. Many other states and localities have recognized that worker retention is the best practice in government service contracting and have enacted laws requiring successor service contractors to retain the incumbent workforce. Additionally, the MTA should adopt policies to make sure that the new contractor cannot undermine the improvements its workers have made in terms of wages, benefits, and other workplace standards. Similar provisions were included in the R211 train contract authorized by the MTA. If its call centers are relocated, MTA would incur costs for recruiting, onboarding, and training a new workforce. Furthermore, the MTA doesn't take into account decent wages and benefits during the bidding process. The result will be lower quality jobs. This will result in high turnover rates, meaning elevated recruitment and training throughout the terms of the contract. Additionally, service qualities will be jeopardizing the performing work with an entirely new workforce without years of experience of current staff, low morale due to poor job quality.
With your remarks.
Performance quality. The MTA would likely also face system problems that occur during large-scale transactions. Thank you.
The next speaker is Marcel Dijon.
Service cuts don't save very much money, and even the most drastic service cuts would not come close to filling the MTA's budget gap. This can be shown from the planned service changes that the board occasionally reviews and approves. The most recent one involved cutting 19 Saturday trips and 17 Sunday trips on the N and R lines, I believe it was, for a savings of approximately $1.2 million a year. If you multiply those numbers out, 52 weeks a year, it comes out to about $750 a subway trip. And $750 a subway trip means that even an uncrowded subway train is making money. And also, if we were to cut service drastically, like almost all the service, make everything as bad as late night services, then the savings would only be on the order of like $500 million, which is much, much smaller than the MTA's budget gap. So there's very little meat or very little fat left on the bone there. And it's best to look everywhere else before even considering cutting service. Thank you.
The next speaker is Wendy Richardson Atwell.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Richardson Atwell. I represent 3 MS and other autoimmune disease groups across New York City. I want to talk about accessoride, and I also want to talk about the MTA buses. From March, I've listened to the MTA talking about the buses are not overcrowded. Wrong. The buses are jam-packed still, despite the fact the front of the bus is blocked off for people with motorized wheelchairs and walkers. People who have canes or on crutches have to go to the back of the bus and stand, and crowded, where people don't wear their masks. There's sardine in there, as always, so nothing has really changed. I'm concerned because I have 4 autoimmune diseases. I know other people have 2 or 3. That's a concern. Our concern also is with accessoride. Will it change? Will it go back to being the same, where they will jam people back into the buses and put 2 or 3 people? We want to know. We also want to know Is the half fare and senior discount going to ever apply to people who have accessorized? Something else we want to know. We also want to know, being that kids are not going to be completely in school, will they be able to travel with their parents? That's a big question. The next question and last question is, when people are going to the supermarket and have to use Accessorize and they have their groceries, they're told they cannot bring over 40 pounds on the Accessorize. This is our only means of transportation, which is totally unfair. They still have to eat. A lot of them still do not want to do online deliveries because you have food stamps. They don't want to do that. I applaud the MTA. Do not forget your seniors. Do not forget those people who have disabilities. You may not be able to see that disability, but it's still a disability. I will be at the next board meeting in September, God willing. I hope and pray everybody is well and safe. And please, please encourage everybody to wear their mask and wear it correctly. Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.